The children abandoned their father until they discovered he was hiding $1 million inheritance. They were the ones who left him on the side of the road, mocking him and claiming they were tired of caring for a sick old man. But when they learned about the fortune hidden on a forgotten piece of land, they returned with gifts and fake tears. What they didn't expect was that the burden now had power and no intention of forgiving. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. Dolores woke up that Saturday morning with a strange feeling in her chest. It was a sensation that was hard to name, somewhere between anticipation and dread. At 73, she had learned to listen to these signals her body sent, the silent warnings that life teaches you when you've lived long enough. Beside her, in the queen-sized bed she'd shared for over 50 years, Walter was still fast asleep, his breathing heavy like someone who needed more time to recover from each day. The house in Queens was quiet. It was a simple one-story home with 3 small bedrooms and a living room that had been the stage for so many family gatherings. The walls held memories in every crack, in every damp spot that insisted on returning each winter. 3 children were born there. They were raised there with sacrifice, love, and an ironclad determination that they would have a better future than their parents. Dolores got up slowly, feeling the weight in her knees that lately complained with every movement. She walked to the kitchen and made coffee, just as she did every morning. The ritual was always the same. Light the stove, wait for the water to boil, pour it slowly through the filter, letting the aroma fill the house. It was in these quiet moments that she allowed her thoughts to wander freely through the past. She remembered when she was young, working as a housekeeper in the homes of wealthy families on Manhattan's Upper East Side. She'd wake up at 4 in the morning to take 2 buses and arrive in time to make breakfast for employers who barely looked her in the eye. Walter at the time worked as a construction worker, coming home with an aching back and calloused hands. Money was tight, every penny had a purpose, but there was a dream that kept them going, to give their children what they never had. Robert, the oldest, was the first to graduate, law, from NYU. Dolores still remembered graduation day, how she cried seeing him in his cap and gown, holding his diploma. Walter stood through the entire ceremony, even with his tired legs, pride stamped on his face. To pay for that college, they sold the only piece of land they owned, a small plot inherited from Walter's parents up near Poughkeepsie. They never regretted it. Seeing their son graduate was the fulfillment of a dream bigger than any property. Maria came next. She got a degree in education and married young, to a businessman who promised a stable future. Dolores sewed the wedding dress with her own hands, every stitch made with love and hope. The ceremony was simple, but beautiful. Maria was radiant, and Dolores, once again, cried with happiness. The youngest, Frank, chose business administration. He was the most outgoing of the 3, always full of plans and ideas. He landed a job at a multinational corporation right after graduating and began to travel constantly. His visits became rarer, but Dolores understood. The children had their own lives, their own obligations. Walter walked into the kitchen, interrupting his wife's daydreams. His hair was messy, his eyes still sleepy. "Morning, my love," he said, his voice hoarse. "Morning. The coffee's ready." They sat at the small kitchen table. It was a sacred moment that shared breakfast. Dolores served toast with butter and watched her husband eat slowly. Walter was thinner lately. The diabetes, discovered 5 years ago, required constant care. The medication was expensive, even with help from Medicare. Sometimes, to save money, he'd skip a dose here and there. Dolores knew, but she didn't say anything. She knew her husband's pride, the difficulty he had accepting the limitations of age. "You know what I dreamed about last night?" Walter asked, breaking the silence. "What?" "I dreamed we were at a party, everyone together. The kids were little, running around the house. Maria was making that chocolate cake she used to make as a teenager. Robert was telling funny stories. Frank was playing the guitar." Dolores smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's been a long time since we had a get-together like that." "It really has," Walter agreed, his gaze distant. "When was the last time the kids came to visit?" Dolores tried to remember. 2 months? 3? The phone calls were more spaced out too. Always busy, always with excuses. Robert with important cases at the firm, Maria with problems in her marriage, Frank traveling for work. It was understandable, of course. Modern life was like that, rushed, no time for anything. But Dolores missed it. She missed the Sundays, when the house filled with people, with laughter, with noise. She missed holding her grandchildren, hearing about their lives, feeling like part of something bigger. Lately, she and Walter seemed to be living in a bubble, separated from the world, growing old in silence. The phone rang, pulling Dolores from her thoughts. It was the cell phone Frank had given her last Christmas, a simple device, but one she still had trouble using. She answered with some hesitation. "Hello? Mom, it's Rob." Dolores's heart skipped a beat. Robert rarely called. "Hi, honey. It's so good to hear your voice." "Mom, I wanted to talk to you guys. Can you get everyone together over there?" "Everyone?" "Me, Maria, and Frank. We wanted to surprise you." "A surprise?" "Yeah. How about this afternoon? Around 3? Dolores looked at Walter, who was watching her curiously. "Of course, son, of course you can. This is your house." "Great. See you later then. And, Mom, dress nicely. We're going out." "Going out? Where?" "It's a surprise, Mom. See you soon." The call ended before Dolores could ask any more questions. She stood there holding the phone, trying to process the information. "What was that?" Walter asked. "That was Robert. He, Maria, and Frank are coming over today. They said they have a surprise for us." Walter raised his eyebrows. "A surprise? What kind of surprise?" "I don't know. He said to dress nicely, that we're going out." A smile began to form on Walter's face. "Well, look at that. We're going out with the kids. How long has it been, huh?" Dolores felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It was a good, warm feeling. Maybe this was the premonition she'd felt when she woke up. It wasn't dread, it was anticipation. The children. We're finally going to make time for them. The rest of the morning was spent getting ready. Dolores chose her best dress, a navy blue one she wore for special occasions. She ironed it carefully, making sure there were no wrinkles. Walter picked out his thin striped dress shirt and the grey slacks he reserved for church. They showered, put on cologne and perfume, and fixed their hair. Dolores even put on a rosy lipstick, something she hadn't done in weeks. At 3 o'clock sharp, the gate opened. Robert arrived first, driving a black sedan. Maria and Frank followed right behind, each in their own car. Dolores and Walter waited at the door, their faces lit with expectation. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad," Robert greeted them, but the hug was quick, almost perfunctory. "Hello," said Maria and Frank almost in unison. There was something strange in the air. A tension Dolores couldn't identify. The siblings exchanged glances with each other, but avoided prolonged eye contact with their parents. They were dressed up, but there was a stiffness in their movements, as if they were there to fulfill an obligation, not out of their own desire. "You two look beautiful," Maria said, but the compliment sounded mechanical. "So let's go," Robert hurried them. "We need to get there before dark." "But where are we going?" Walter asked. "It's a surprise, Dad. You'll understand later." Dolores and Walter got into the back of Robert's car. The seat was clean, almost impersonal. During the drive, Robert kept his eyes fixed on the road. He tried to make small talk a few times, but the answers were short, evasive. Maria and Frank followed behind in a convoy. The city of Queens faded behind them. They got on I-87 North, heading up toward the Hudson Valley. The landscape gradually changed, buildings giving way to greener, less populated areas. Dolores watched out the window, trying to guess their destination. Maybe a restaurant in a nearby town, a country house the kids had rented for a special lunch. The longer they drove, the more the premonition returned. But now it was different. It wasn't anticipation. It was fear. "Are you guys okay?" Walter asked, noticing the heavy silence. "We're fine, Dad." "Relax." But the tone wasn't convincing. After almost an hour, Robert exited the main highway and took a secondary road. It was a dirt road surrounded by pastures and woods. There were no signs, no houses, just the empty road stretching ahead. "Robert, where are we going?" Dolores insisted, her voice trembling. "We're almost there." But they didn't arrive anywhere. Robert simply stopped the car in the middle of the road. Maria and Frank parked behind him. The three of them got out and opened their trunks. From inside, they pulled out two old suitcases that Dolores recognized immediately. They were the suitcases kept in the bedroom closet. The same ones they used on the rare trips they took. Robert placed the suitcases on the ground by the side of the road. Maria and Frank remained silent, their eyes darting away whenever Dolores tried to meet their gaze. "What's going on?" Walter asked, his voice firmer now, demanding answers. Robert took a deep breath. When he spoke, the words came out fast, as if rehearsed. "Dad, Mom, we just can't do this anymore. You're old, you're sick, you're too much work. We have our own lives, our own families, our own commitments. We can't keep taking care of you." Dolores felt the ground disappear from under her feet. "What do you mean taking care of us? We never asked for anything." "You don't have to ask. Just existing is a burden. The cost of Dad's medicine, the doctor's appointments, the house that's falling apart. It all falls on us." "Robert," Maria interjected, her voice low, "let's just get this over with." Robert nodded. "You're going to have to manage on your own. From now on, everyone takes care of themselves." Walter took a step forward, incredulous. "You can't be serious." "We are, Dad. We've already decided. We talked it over, and it's for the best." "For the best?" Dolores repeated, her voice breaking. "We worked our entire lives for you. We gave up everything, and now you abandon us on a road?" "Mom, don't be dramatic. You'll figure something out. There are shelters, government programs. You're smart. You'll manage." Frank, who had been silent until then, turned and walked back to his car. Maria followed him. Robert stayed for another moment, his gaze hard, without a hint of remorse. "Your clothes are in the suitcases. Good luck." He got in his car and started the engine. Maria and Frank did the same. The three vehicles turned around and drove back down the dirt road. From inside one of the cars they heard nervous laughter, as if they were relieved to have finally gotten rid of a burden. Dolores and Walter stood there side by side, the suitcases at their feet. The afternoon sun was hot, relentless. The silence of the road was deafening. There were no cars passing, there was no one around, just the two of them, abandoned like old objects that were no longer useful. Walter was the first to move. He opened one of the suitcases and found a few clothes thrown in carelessly, a pair of old shoes, nothing of value. Dolores remained motionless, tears streaming silently down her face. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't despair. It was something worse. It was the silent collapse of a lifetime of love and sacrifice that had suddenly been rendered worthless. Walter took his wife's hand. It was trembling, not from fear, but from a deep visceral pain that had no name. "Come on, Dolores. We can't stay here." She looked at him, her eyes red. "Where do we go?" "I don't know, but we can't stay here." They picked up the suitcases and started walking. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know what to do. They just walked one step after another under the scorching sun, trying to process what had just happened. The dirt road seemed endless. With every step, Dolores felt her knees ache. Thirst began to set in. Walter was sweating profusely, his breathing heavy. But they kept going. What else could they do? After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, they spotted a building in the distance. It was a simple house with a wooden fence around it. An old pickup truck was parked out front. Walter looked at Dolores. "Let's try to ask for help." They approached and knocked on the gate. A middle-aged man appeared, his face sunburnt, his expression wary. "Good afternoon," Walter said. "Sorry to bother you. We're lost and need some help." The man looked them over, sizing them up. He saw the state they were in, the suitcases in their hands, the exhaustion on their faces. "What happened to you?" Walter hesitated. How could he explain? How could he put into words the betrayal, the abandonment, the humiliation? "Our children left us on the road. They said they don't want to take care of us anymore." The man was silent for a long moment. Then his expression changed. It wasn't pity. It was outrage. "What kind of people does something like that? Come on in. I'll figure out a way to help you." He opened the gate and led them inside. The house was humble but clean. A woman was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The man quickly explained the situation. The woman, named Nancy, looked at Dolores and Walter with genuine compassion. "You must be starving. Sit down. I'll fix you something." "Oh, you don't have to bother," Dolores began, but Nancy cut her off. "It's no bother. It's the least we can do." They sat at the table. The food was simple, rice, beans, and shredded chicken, but it was the best meal they'd had in a long time. Not because of the food itself, but because of the gesture, because of the humanity they found in strangers, something their own children had denied them. The man who introduced himself as John was a truck driver. He drove long routes through upstate New York and knew the region well. "Can't you go back home?" John asked. Walter shook his head. "The house belongs to the kids now, they pay. So the rent. If we go back, they'll just kick us out again." John scratched his beard, thinking, "There's a boarding house in Albany. The owner is a good person, a friend of mine. I can take you there tomorrow morning. It's a simple place, but honest. Maybe she'll take you in until you can get on your feet." Dolores and Walter exchanged glances. They had no choice. They accepted the offer with gratitude. That night, they slept in a makeshift guest room. The bed was hard, the mattress thin, but it was a roof over their heads. Dolores lay beside. Walter, the tears returning. "Why, Walter, what did we do wrong?" Walter had no answers. He just held his wife's hand, squeezing it tightly, as if trying to transmit a certainty he didn't feel himself. "We'll get through this. Somehow, we'll get through this." But deep down, they both knew that the pain of that betrayal would never fully heal. It was a wound that would bleed for the rest of their lives. The next morning, John kept his promise. He drove them to Albany, a city much larger than the deserted road where they had been abandoned. The boarding house was in a neighborhood far from downtown, an old two-story house with a worn but clean facade. The owner, Mrs. Teresa, was a woman in her 60s with gray hair tied in a bun. John explained the situation in a low voice. Mrs. Teresa listened in silence, her eyes attentive. When John finished, she sighed deeply. "They can stay. The back room is free. I won't charge you up front, but I'll need you to help with chores around the house. Nothing heavy, just what you can manage." Walter felt a wave of relief. "We'll do whatever we can, thank you so much." John said his goodbyes, leaving a card with his phone number. "If you need anything, call me and don't give up. Life has a way of turning things around." Dolores and Walter were shown to their room. It was small, with a double bed, an old wardrobe, and a window that looked out onto a backyard with a few chickens. It wasn't much, but it was a new beginning. In the following days, they tried to adapt to their new reality. Dolores helped in the kitchen, peeling vegetables, washing dishes. Walter swept the yard, fixed small problems around the house. The other boarders were mostly temporary workers, simple people who were also just trying to get by. But the pain lingered. At night, Dolores would cry softly. She thought of the grandchildren she might never see again. She thought of the family holidays that would never happen. She thought of everything they had built, which had crumbled in a matter of minutes on that road. Walter, for his part, stewed in guilt. He replayed every decision he had made as a father. Where had he gone wrong? Why had his children become capable of such cruelty? The answer never came, but the question tormented him constantly. One afternoon, Mrs. Teresa sat with them on the porch. She had noticed their state, the sadness they carried like an invisible weight. "I know you're hurting. I'm not going to say it will go away because some pain never does, but it will hurt less with time. And you'll discover that family isn't just about blood. Sometimes you find family where you least expect it." Dolores looked at the woman, her eyes welling up. "How can you be so kind to strangers?" Mrs. Teresa smiled, a sad smile. "Because I've been abandoned too. My husband left me with 3 small children many years ago. It was a neighbor who helped me, gave me a job, gave me my dignity back. I learned that you have to be the help you once needed." Walter felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you for everything." "No need to thank me. Just promise me one thing, don't give up. I know it seems impossible now, but you'll find a way." Those words echoed in Dolores and Walter's minds. Don't give up. It was easier said than done, but they tried, they continued. To help at the boarding house, got to know the neighbors, and tried to build a new routine in this strange city that was slowly starting to feel less hostile. But the wound remained open, and the question persisted: what would come next? How could they rebuild a life in their 70s with no resources, no family, nothing but pain and memories? The answer was yet to come, and when it did, it would bring a twist that none of them could have ever predicted. The first few weeks in Albany were a slow and painful adjustment. Dolores woke up, every day feeling like it was all a nightmare, that at any moment she would open her eyes in their house in Queens, hear Walter's voice calling her for coffee, and life would go back to normal. But reality relentlessly asserted itself, cruel and unyielding. The routine at the boarding house helped to occupy their minds. Mrs. Teresa was a woman of her word. While she expected them to work, she treated them with respect and dignity. Dolores took over some of the kitchen duties, preparing breakfast for the boarders, washing dishes, organizing the pantry. Walter took care of the yard, fixed dripping faucets, changed light bulbs, and did small repairs. They were simple tasks, but they gave them a sense of purpose, a reason to get out of bed each day. The other residents of the boarding house were a curious mix of lives in transit. There was Mr. Miller, a man nearly 80 who worked as a janitor in a downtown office building. There was Jacqueline, a woman in her 30s who worked as a waitress at a diner and studied at night to finish her high school diploma. And there was Roger, a quiet young man who worked at an auto parts factory and rarely spoke to anyone. Each carried their own stories, their own pains. Slowly, Dolores and Walter began to open up. They didn't share all the details of their abandonment, but they made it clear they were there because they had nowhere else to go. The response was surprising. No one judged. No one asked invasive questions. They just offered quiet companionship, small gestures of solidarity. Mr. Miller started inviting Walter to play dominoes on Sunday afternoons. Jacqueline brought a container of brownies left over from a party at the diner. Roger, the most reserved of them all, left a package of cookies at their door without a word. They were small things, but they meant the world. Dolores realized there was kindness in the world, even if it didn't come from the people she expected. One afternoon, while peeling potatoes in the kitchen, Mrs. Teresa sat down beside her. "Dolores, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Do you ever think about going after your children? Trying to talk to them?" Dolores paused, the knife suspended in mid-air. The question touched a wound she had been trying to ignore. "I don't know. Sometimes I think so, that maybe they acted on impulse, that they regret it. But then I remember the words they said, the way they looked at us. There was no regret in their eyes, Mrs. Teresa. There was relief." Mrs. Teresa sighed. "I understand. But you know, sometimes people do horrible things when they're under pressure, when they're scared or angry. I'm not defending them. Far from it. I just think that, in the future, you might regret not having tried." Dolores shook her head, tears threatening to return. "I don't know if I have the strength for that. I don't know if I want to face more rejection." "Then wait. Let life show you the way. Sometimes the answers come when we least expect them." That same week, Walter had a diabetic crisis. Dolores found him passed out in the yard, his face pale, his body trembling. Mrs. Teresa called an ambulance immediately. At the hospital, they discovered that Walter hadn't been taking his insulin correctly, trying to save money on his medication. "Mr. Miller, you can't do this," the doctor, a young, tired-looking man, scolded him. "Diabetes is no joke. If you don't take care of yourself, you could have serious complications." "I know, doctor, but the medicine is expensive and we don't have much money." The doctor looked at Dolores, then back at Walter. "Have you tried looking into assistance programs? There are low-cost prescription plans through Medicare and community health centers that distribute insulin for free." "We didn't know about that," Dolores admitted. The doctor wrote down some addresses and explained the procedure. Before discharging them, he made a recommendation. "And please don't try to face this alone. Seek help. There are a lot of people willing to help. You just have to know where to look." Back at the boarding house, Walter was quieter than usual. Dolores could tell he was mulling something over, but she didn't press him. She knew her husband well enough to know that he would talk when he was ready. That night, as they were getting ready for bed, Walter finally broke the silence. "Dolores, I failed." She turned to him, confused. "Failed how?" "As a father, as a husband. Look where we are, old, sick, with nothing. I should have done things differently." "Walter, you worked your entire life, you gave everything you could. But it wasn't enough, was it? Look what our children became, people capable of abandoning their own parents. If I had been stricter, if I had taught them better, maybe—" Dolores interrupted him, her voice firm. "No, don't put that on yourself. We did what we could with what we had. If they chose to be this way, the fault is theirs, not ours." Walter didn't reply. He just hugged his wife, and the two of them held each other in silence, finding comfort in one another. The days passed, and with them came a more stable routine. Dolores and Walter began to explore Albany. The city was large, bustling, very different from Queens. There was a park Dolores liked to visit, Washington Park, where seniors gathered to walk and chat. Walter discovered a public library where he could read newspapers and books for free. It was at the library that Walter started thinking about something that had long been buried in his mind. He remembered an old folder he kept at home, full of papers he had never organized. They were documents inherited from his father, who had passed away when Walter was still young. At the time, he hadn't paid much attention to them. He was too busy working, raising children, trying to survive. But now, with free time on his hands, he began to wonder if he had missed something important. One afternoon, returning from the library, he found Mrs. Teresa in the living room. "Mrs. Teresa, can I ask you a favor?" "Of course, Walter. What is it?" "I left some things at the house in Queens, old documents from my father. Is there any way someone could get them for me?" Mrs. Teresa thought for a moment. "Do you have the key to the house?" "I do. They never asked for it back." "I'll call John, the truck driver. He passes through Queens sometimes. Maybe he can stop by there." A few days later, John showed up at the boarding house with a dusty box. Inside were the folders Walter remembered, along with some clothes and personal items Dolores had left behind. "Your kids weren't there when I stopped by," John said. "A neighbor helped me get in. She said she's seen the house locked up for weeks." Dolores felt a tightness in her chest. The house locked up. The children hadn't even gone to check on it, or maybe they had, taken what they wanted and left the rest behind. That night, Walter spread the documents out on the bed. They were papers yellowed with age, some nearly illegible. Old deeds, receipts, certificates. Dolores helped him organize them, trying to make sense of the mess. And then they found it. A deed for a plot of land near Poughkeepsie, registered in his father's name. The document was frayed at the edges, but still readable. The land was in an area that, according to the description, was rural at the time of purchase, back in the 1950s. Walter looked at Dolores, his eyes wide. "I remember this land. My father bought it when he was young, planning to build a house, but he never did. When he passed away, the land came to me, but I never looked into it. I thought it was worthless." Dolores took the document, examining it closely. "Do you think it still exists? That it's still in your name?" "I don't know. It's been over 50 years. It could have been sold for debts, it could have been squatted on, it could have been developed. But it's worth trying to find out." The next morning, they went to the county clerk's office in Albany to inquire. The clerk, a young man with glasses and an efficient demeanor, listened to their story and took down the details. "I'll have to do a search. It could take a few days. Leave a contact number." Dolores left the number for the boarding house. The following days were a mix of anxiety and hope. Walter tried not to get his hopes up, but it was impossible not to wonder. What if the land still existed? What if it was worth something? It didn't have to be much, just enough to give them a little security, to not have to depend on the charity of others. The answer came a week later. The clerk called, asking them to come to the office. When they arrived, he greeted them with an expression Dolores couldn't decipher. Was it surprise? Concern? "Well, I have good news and bad news," the clerk began. "The good news is the property is still registered in your father's name, Mr. Miller. It was never sold, never transferred. The bad news is it's not in compliance. The property taxes haven't been paid in decades, and there are several. Colleen's against it. Walter's heart raced. Does that mean we can get it in order? You can, but you'll need a lawyer, and there's one more thing. What? This property is in an area that has developed significantly in recent years. It's no longer a rural zone, it's a valuable area, near a high-end residential community. If you can clear the title, this land could be worth a good amount of money. Dolores and Walter exchanged glances. They didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After so much suffering, maybe life was finally giving them a chance, but their joy was tempered with caution. They needed a lawyer, and lawyers were expensive. How would they manage? Mrs. Teresa, upon hearing the news, had an idea. There's a lawyer who goes to my church, Mr. Morris. He's a good man, often does pro bono work for people who can't afford it. I'll talk to him. 2 days later, Mr. Morris showed up at the boarding house. He was a man in his 50s, with graying hair, a serious demeanor but kind eyes. He listened to Dolores and Walter's story attentively, asked questions and analyzed the documents. I'll be honest with you, this will be a lot of work. We have to clear the title, pay back taxes, and there might be squatters or people claiming ownership. But it's possible, and I'll take the case. I won't charge you any fees until the property is sold. When it sells, we'll settle up. Walter extended his hand, his eyes moist. Thank you so much, sir. No need to thank me. Just promise me one thing. If we manage to clear this up and sell the land, don't let the money change who you are. Dolores smiled, a genuine smile for the first time in weeks. You have our word. The process began. Mr. Morris went to Poughkeepsie, conducted surveys, took photos, and talked to neighbors. The land was vacant, surrounded by a low stone wall that was barely standing. It was nearly a quarter of an acre, a considerable size, and as the clerk had said, it was in a region that had become immensely valuable over the decades. Meanwhile, Dolores and Walter tried to live their lives as normally as possible. But it was impossible not to dream. They imagined what they would do with the money. They didn't want luxury, just security. A simple house where they could live with dignity. Maybe help Mrs. Teresa, who had done so much for them. Maybe donate to an organization that helped abandoned seniors so others wouldn't have to go through what they had. A month passed. Mr. Morris managed to clear the paperwork, paying the back taxes with an advance from his own pocket, with the promise of being reimbursed upon the sale. The land was now officially in Walter's name. The news spread quickly. Poughkeepsie was smaller than Albany, and news about valuable properties traveled like wildfire. It wasn't long before developers started showing interest. The first offer came from a company called Alvarado Construction. The representative, a man in an impeccable suit with a sharp smile, offered $300,000 for the land. Mr. Morris advised them not to accept. This land is worth much more. They're trying to take advantage of your situation. But $300,000 was a fortune to Dolores and Walter. They had never seen so much money in their lives. How could they refuse? Trust me, Mr. Morris insisted. I'll get a better offer. And he did. A second developer, Planalto Construction, offered $500,000. But there was a condition. They needed the signatures of all the heirs. Since the land had been inherited from Walter's father, technically the children also had a right to the inheritance, even though they had never known the land existed. Dolores felt her stomach turn. The children, we'll have to talk to them. Walter was silent for a long moment. The thought of seeing Robert, Maria, and Frank again was painful. But there was no choice. Mr. Morris tried to make contact. He called the numbers Dolores and Walter provided, sent certified letters. The response was cold and disinterested. Robert said he didn't care about any land, that he didn't want to get involved. Maria didn't even return the call. Frank said he would think about it, but never gave a definitive answer. It was then that the situation took an unexpected turn. The news of the land leaked. It's unclear how, but it reached the children's ears that the value was high, very high, $500,000, a fortune, and suddenly they reappeared. One Saturday morning, Dolores was in the boarding house kitchen when she heard a knock at the door. Mrs. Teresa went. to answer. She returned with a worried expression. "Dolores, there are some people here to see you." Dolores's heart pounded. She went to the living room and saw them. Robert, Maria, and Frank were standing there, with forced smiles and gifts in their hands. "Mom, we've missed you so much," Maria said, trying to hug her. Dolores stepped back, her body rigid. "What are you doing here?" "We came to apologize," Robert said, his voice soft, almost regretful. "We were wrong. We acted on impulse. We were scared, angry, but we never wanted to hurt you." Dolores looked at them, incredulous. Frank stepped forward. "We're so sorry, truly. We've thought about you every day. We haven't been able to sleep right since that day." Walter appeared at the door, drawn by the noise. When he saw his children, his face hardened. "What do you want?" Robert swallowed hard. "We want to reconcile. We want you to come home. We'll take good care of you, the way we always should have." Walter let out a bitter laugh. "Reconcile? You abandoned us on a road. You left us for dead. And now you show up with gifts and apologies. Do you think we're idiots?" "Dad, it's not like that," Maria protested. "We made a mistake, but we love you." A rage grew inside Dolores, a rage that had been dormant for a long time. "Do you love us? Or do you love the land?" The three children fell silent. The masks began to slip. "What land?" Robert asked, trying to sound innocent. "Don't pretend you don't know," Walter retorted. "You heard about the land and came for the money." Robert dropped the act. "Look, the land is an inheritance. We have a right to it. We're not asking for a favor." "A right? You lost any right you had when you abandoned us." The argument escalated. Voices were raised. Mrs. Teresa had to intervene, asking everyone to calm down. In the end, the children left, but not before making it clear they wouldn't give up. "We'll go after our rights," Robert threatened. "If you won't do this the easy way, we'll do it the hard way." In the following days, the threat became a reality. The children hired a lawyer and filed a lawsuit, claiming their share of the inheritance. More than that, they began a smear campaign. They contacted journalists, told a distorted version of the story, and painted Dolores and Walter as absent parents, confused by age and manipulated by third parties. A local newspaper published an article with the headline, "Children accuse elderly parents of attempting to steal family inheritance." The report didn't investigate the facts, merely repeating the version told by the children. The backlash was immediate. Some people in Albany began to look at Dolores and Walter with suspicion. Whispers spread. Were they really the victims they appeared to be? Dolores cried for days. The pain of abandonment was already unbearable. Now, added to it was public humiliation, the feeling of being judged by strangers who didn't know the truth. But Walter this time refused to be broken. He was tired of being a victim. He was tired of suffering in silence. With the support of Mr. Morris, they began to gather evidence. They called John, the truck driver, who testified about how he had found Dolores and Walter abandoned. They called Mrs. Teresa, who confirmed the state they were in when they arrived at the boarding house. They called the hospital doctor who had treated Walter during his diabetic crisis. Mr. Morris prepared a solid defense. When the case went to trial, he presented not just documents, but a complete and irrefutable narrative of the abandonment, the cruelty, and the attempt to take advantage of two vulnerable seniors. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a stern gaze, heard both sides. The children, confident at first, began to stammer when confronted with the evidence. They tried to deny it, but the proof was undeniable. The verdict came months later. The land belonged exclusively to Dolores and Walter. The children had no right to anything. Furthermore, they were ordered to pay the court costs and were warned about the consequences of attempting to defame their parents again. Dolores and Walter cried, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of relief, of justice, of a weight finally being lifted from their shoulders. The legal victory brought a mix of relief and strangeness. Dolores and Walter had spent so much time suffering, fighting just to survive, that now, with the certainty that the land was theirs, they didn't know exactly what to do with this feeling of security. It was as if the ground beneath their feet had suddenly solidified, but they still felt they could sink at any moment. Planalto Construction maintained its offer of $500,000, but Mr. Morris, ever cautious, suggested they wait. Another developer was interested, Horizon Construction, which was evaluating the land for a mid-range development. They promised a proposal soon. While they waited, life at the boarding house continued. But something had changed. Dolores and Walter were no longer just needy boarders. They were people who had fought a battle and won. Mrs. Teresa treated them with renewed respect. Mr. Miller stopped calling them by their first names and started using Mrs. Dolores and Mr. Walter. Jacqueline constantly asked about the case, interested in every detail. Even Roger, the quietest one, began to greet them every morning. The news of their victory also spread through the city. The newspaper that had published the defamatory article was pressured into printing a retraction. The new report told the full story, from the abandonment to the legal triumph. Public opinion shifted. People who had once looked at them with suspicion now greeted Dolores and Walter on the street. Some apologized for having believed the lies. Others simply offered words of support. But the emotional wound persisted. At night, when the boarding house fell silent and the world seemed to sleep, Dolores still cried. She thought of the grandchildren she hadn't seen grow up. She thought of the birthday parties she would never celebrate. She thought about what it would be like to have a family that truly cared, not for money but for love. Walter also suffered, but in a different way. He stewed in guilt. He questioned every decision he had made as a father. Had he been too absent, working so much that he didn't notice the kind of people his children were becoming? Had he been too permissive, giving them everything they asked for without teaching them the value of sacrifice? Or had he been too strict, creating a resentment that now manifested in this cruel way? The questions had no answers, and perhaps they never would. The offer from Horizon Construction arrived 3 weeks later, $700,000. It was an amount Dolores and Walter had never imagined having. They met with Mr. Morris to discuss it. "I recommend you accept," the lawyer said. "It's a fair offer above market value, and you need this security now." Walter looked at Dolores. She nodded. "We'll accept." The sale process took a few more weeks. Signatures, documents, bureaucracy. But finally, on a Tuesday morning, the money was transferred to the account Mr. Morris had helped them open. $700,000. After taxes and the lawyer's fees, which Walter insisted on paying in full despite Mr. Morris's initial offer to charge only what was necessary, they were left with $620,000. It was more money than Dolores and Walter had earned in their entire working lives. The first thing they did was cry. They sat in their room at the boarding house looking at the bank statement and cried. Not from joy, but from a deep, almost painful relief. Now at least they wouldn't have to worry about medicine, food, or a roof over their heads. But the second thing they did was decide how to use that money, and it was in this decision that they showed who they truly were. "I want to help those who helped us," Dolores said. "Mrs. Teresa, John, Mr. Morris. Without them, we wouldn't be here." Walter agreed immediately. "And I want to help others too. Other seniors who are going through what we went through. Others who have been abandoned, forgotten." They sought out Mr. Morris again, this time not to ask for help but to offer it. They wanted to donate part of the money to institutions that cared for the elderly. They wanted to create a fund to help people in vulnerable situations. They wanted to make a difference. Mr. Morris was surprised but moved. "Are you sure? This money could guarantee you a comfortable old age." "We don't need comfort," Dolores said. "We need purpose, and helping others is the greatest purpose we can have." Their first donation went to the boarding house itself. Mrs. Teresa had mentioned weeks ago that she was struggling financially. The house needed repairs, the plumbing was old, the wiring was precarious. Dolores and Walter gave her $50,000. Mrs. Teresa tried to refuse, but they insisted. "You gave us dignity when we had nothing. Let us pay it back." Mrs. Teresa cried. She hugged Dolores tightly, whispering thanks that seemed endless. The second donation was for John, the truck driver. They found him at a truck stop off the thruway. When they saw the state of his truck, old and in need of repairs, they decided on the spot. They gave him $20,000. John tried to refuse, but Walter was firm. "You saved us that day. You gave us hope when we had none left. Please, take it." John, a big, strong man, cried like a child. He said he would use the money to fix his truck and maybe, finally, take some time off to be with his family. The third donation was for Mr. Morris. Even though he had received his fees, Dolores and Walter wanted to do more. They found out that the lawyer maintained a small office that provided free legal services to the needy, but was always struggling to stay afloat. They donated $30,000 to the office. Mr. Morris was speechless. When he finally managed to speak, he just said, "You are the most generous people I have ever met." But the donations didn't stop. Dolores and Walter researched institutions in Albany that cared for the elderly. They found St. Anthony's Nursing Home, a modest place that housed seniors who were abandoned or had no family. The director, a woman named Sister Lucy, received them warmly. "We visited many seniors here and realized that many are in the same situation we were in," Dolores said. "We want to help." They donated $100,000 to the nursing home. The money would be used to improve the facilities, hire more caregivers, and buy medical equipment. Sister Lucy cried, thanked them, and made a point of introducing Dolores and Walter to all the residents. It was an emotional meeting. Many seniors there had similar stories: families that disappeared, children who forgot, lonely old ages. Dolores spoke at length with a woman named Mrs. Peterson, who was 82. She had been abandoned by her children in a public nursing home years ago and had never received another visit. "I thought it was just me," Mrs. Peterson said, her trembling hands holding Dolores's. "I thought I had done something terribly wrong to deserve this. But seeing your story, I realize it's not our fault. Some people just don't know the value of what they have." That conversation deeply marked Dolores. She realized that the pain she carried was not unique, not exclusive. There were thousands, perhaps millions, of elderly people being abandoned, forgotten, treated like burdens. And if she and Walter could do something to change that, even if, only for a few people, it would be worth it. With the rest of the money, they bought a house. It wasn't big, it wasn't luxurious. It was a simple 2-bedroom house on a quiet street in a middle-class neighborhood in Albany. It had a small garden out front, where Dolores planted roses and jasmine. It had a spacious kitchen where she began to cook with pleasure again. It had a porch where Walter liked to sit in the evenings, reading his newspapers and books. It was a home. Finally, after so much suffering, they had a home. But the house wasn't just for them. Dolores and Walter decided to turn it into a meeting place for seniors in the community. Every Wednesday afternoon, they opened their doors to anyone who wanted to come. They served coffee and cake, chatted, listened to stories, and offered companionship. The initiative started small, with just 3 or 4 people, but it grew. Soon there were 10, 15, 20 seniors attending the Wednesday afternoons. Walter began to organize small talks on seniors' rights, how to protect themselves from scams, and health and wellness. Dolores organized craft and cooking groups. Some seniors started bringing their families, and the Wednesday afternoons turned into community events. The local media took notice. A reporter from a television channel came to the house to do a story. The report showed Dolores and Walter's journey from abandonment to transformation. It showed how they had decided to use the money not to get rich but to help. The story aired and went viral on social media. Messages of support began pouring in from all over the country. People shared their own stories of abandonment, thanking Dolores and Walter for giving a voice to a pain that many carried in silence. But not everything was recognition and gratitude. Robert, Maria, and Frank saw the report, and the anger they felt was immense. They saw their parents being celebrated, receiving praise, being treated like heroes, while they, the children, were seen as villains, as cruel and selfish people. Robert, in particular, couldn't accept it. He started spreading rumors, saying his parents were using the story to gain fame, to play the victim. He tried to contact the press again, but this time no one was interested in his version. The truth had already been told, and people had chosen whom to believe. Maria tried a different approach. She called Dolores, her voice choked with emotion, asking for forgiveness. She said she was having problems in her marriage, that she was in therapy, that she had realized the mistake she had made. Dolores listened in silence. When Maria finished, she replied calmly, "Maria, I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I ever will. What you did is unjustifiable, but I'm not going to spend the rest of my life being angry. I'm going to spend it with love, with purpose, with people who deserve it if you truly are. Sorry, you'll have to prove it. Not to me, but to yourself." Maria hung up without another word. Dolores stood there, holding the phone, feeling a weight in her chest. Part of her wanted to believe her daughter was being sincere, but another part, the one that had learned the hard way to protect itself, knew it was too soon to trust. Frank, the youngest, showed the least reaction. He didn't call, didn't try to make contact. He simply disappeared. Dolores learned from Mrs. Teresa, who had contacts in the Queens area, that Frank had moved to another city, possibly Buffalo, and was avoiding any mention of his parents. The pain persisted, but now at least there was something more. There was purpose. There were people who depended on them, who admired them, who truly loved them. One afternoon during one of the Wednesday gatherings, a young woman appeared at the door. She was in her 30s with black hair tied in a ponytail and a shy expression. Beside her, she held the hand of a boy of about 6 with big, curious eyes. Dolores answered the door. "Can I help you?" The woman hesitated. "I'm Camilla, Frank's ex-wife, and this is Peter, my son, your grandson." Dolores felt the world stop. The boy looked up at her with innocence, not understanding the tension in the air. "Hi, Grandma," he said, his voice soft. Dolores couldn't hold back her tears. She knelt down to the boy's level. "Hi, my love." Camilla took a deep breath. "I heard your story. Frank never let Peter meet his grandparents. He said you were complicated people, that it was better to keep a distance. But when I saw the report, I realized I was being manipulated. I divorced Frank 2 years ago. He was never a good father to Peter. He hardly ever visits, and Peter always asked me about his grandparents, so I decided to bring him here." Dolores looked at the boy. He had Walter's eyes, the shy smile that reminded her of Frank as a child. He was a piece of family she thought she would never have again. Walter appeared at the door, drawn by the movement. When he saw the boy, he understood immediately. He approached slowly, as if afraid the scene would vanish if he moved too quickly. "This is your grandpa," Camilla said, encouraging the boy. Peter held out his small hand. Walter took it, feeling the smallness, the fragility, the purity of that gesture. "Nice to meet you, Grandpa." Walter couldn't speak. He just hugged the boy, a careful embrace, heavy with years of pain and hope. Camilla was invited in. She sat in the living room and explained her situation. She was working as a secretary, struggling to raise her son alone. Frank paid child support irregularly, and contact between father and son was almost non-existent. "I don't want anything from you," Camilla clarified. "I didn't come here because of the land money. I came because Peter deserves to know his grandparents, and because after hearing your story I realized you are good people, much better than Frank ever made me believe." Dolores held Camilla's hand. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving us this chance." Peter was fascinated by the house, by the people who were there. He ran through the garden, played with the seniors attending the gathering, and ate cake and cookies that Dolores had made. He was a happy, innocent child, unburdened by the grudges of adults. Before leaving, Camilla arranged to come back the next Saturday. Dolores and Walter stood at the door, watching the mother and son walk away. When they turned back inside, they hugged each other, crying and smiling at the same time. It was as if a small sliver of light had broken through a sky that had been overcast for so long. That night, lying in bed, Dolores and Walter spoke softly. "Do you think we can trust Camilla?" Walter asked. "I think so. She didn't have to come. She could have stayed away, like the others. But she came. She brought Peter. That means something. And what if Frank shows up, tries to ruin it? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But for today, let's just be thankful for what we have." Walter smiled. "You've changed, Dolores." "How so?" "You've gotten stronger, more determined." Dolores thought for a moment. "We didn't have a choice. We either got strong or we died inside. They remained in silence, holding hands, finding comfort in each other's presence. They had lost so much, suffered so much. But they were alive. They were together, and now they had a purpose that went beyond themselves. The rest of the week passed in almost childlike anticipation. Dolores prepared the guest room, putting on clean sheets and arranging some toys she had bought at a thrift store. Walter cleaned the yard, repaired an old swing set he found at a junkyard, and installed it in the garden. On Saturday, Camilla and Peter arrived mid-morning. The boy ran through the garden, tested the swing, and shouted with joy. Dolores served lunch, rice, beans, steak, and French fries. Nothing fancy, but made with love. Peter ate as if it were the best meal in the world. After lunch, Walter taught the boy to play checkers. Peter was smart, a quick learner. He laughed when he won the first game, the sound of his laughter filling the house with a joy that hadn't existed there for a long time. Camilla talked at length with Dolores. She told her about her marriage to Frank, about how he changed after their son was born, how he became distant, cold, more concerned with work and money than with family, how, in the end, she realized she was married to someone she didn't love. "I should have seen the signs," Camilla said, "but you always think things will change, that they'll get better." Dolores understood perfectly. How many times had she also deluded herself, believing her children would change, that they would go back to being the loving children they once were. When Camilla and Peter left, they promised to return the following week. And they did. And the next. And the next. The visits became regular, part of their routine. Peter started calling Dolores and Walter Grandma and Grandpa without hesitation. He brought drawings from school, told them about his friends, asked for advice. It was a new beginning, small, fragile, but real. Months passed. Dolores and Walter's house became a landmark in the community. The Wednesday gatherings grew so large they had to rent a nearby community hall. Walter started giving talks in other cities, invited by city councils and non-profits. Dolores wrote a short book telling her story, encouraged by Mr. Morris. The book was self-published but sold surprisingly well. Life had changed. They were no longer those broken people, abandoned on a road. They were survivors. They were fighters. They were examples. But deep down, there was still a void. The children, Robert, Maria, Frank, they never tried to make contact again. And although Dolores and Walter had learned to live without them, the absence hurt. It always would. Until on a rainy September afternoon the phone rang. Dolores answered. "Mom?" It was Frank. Dolores froze. Her son's voice, after so long, brought a flood of conflicting emotions. "Frank? Yeah, it's me. I heard you met Peter." "I did." There was a long pause. "I wanted to talk." Dolores stood holding the phone, her heart racing, trying to process the fact that Frank, after so much time, had called. There was something different in her son's voice. It wasn't the arrogance of months ago, nor the coldness of the day they were abandoned. It was something closer to shame, perhaps even regret. "Talk about what?" Dolores asked, her voice cautious. "About everything. About what we did. About Peter. About me." Dolores looked at Walter, who was watching her from the living room, his eyes questioning. She covered the mouthpiece and whispered her son's name. Walter stood up immediately, moving closer. "You can come here," Dolores said, "but your father and I aren't promising anything. We'll listen to what you have to say, but we're not expecting miracles." "I understand. Can I come tomorrow?" "You can." "Thank you, Mom. Really." The call ended. Dolores stood there, the phone still in her hand. Walter hugged her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you think he's sincere?" he asked. "I don't know, but we need to listen, at least so we're not left wondering." That night, neither of them slept well. They lay awake, talking softly about what they would say, how they would react. Part of Dolores wanted to believe that Frank had changed. Part of her wanted to hug her son and forgive everything. But another part, the one still bleeding from the betrayal, feared it was just another manipulation. The next morning, Dolores cleaned the house compulsively. She wiped surfaces that were already clean, arranged objects that were already in place. Walter tried to calm her, but he was just as nervous. Frank arrived at 10 in the morning. When Dolores opened the door, she barely recognized him. He had lost weight, his eyes were sunken, and an unshaven beard gave him a disheveled look. He was no longer the confident, well-dressed man who had abandoned them on the road. He was someone broken, tired. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling. Dolores didn't answer right away. She just stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Walter was in the living room, his arms crossed, his posture defensive. Frank looked at his father and swallowed hard. "Dad." "Frank," Walter greeted him, his tone neutral. They sat down. Dolores served coffee, more out of habit than hospitality. The silence was heavy, thick with expectation. Frank held the cup but didn't drink. He stared into the dark liquid as if searching for the right words. "I don't know where to start," he finally said. "I don't know how to apologize for something so horrible." "Then why are you here?" Walter asked, direct. "Because I've hit rock bottom. I lost my job 3 months ago. The company fired me because they found out I was embezzling money to pay off gambling debts. The bank foreclosed on my apartment. I'm living in a rented room. Camilla won't let me see Peter because I'm 6 months behind on child support. And when I look in the mirror, I don't recognize the person I've become." Dolores felt a mix of compassion and anger. It was impossible not to care, even after everything, but it was also impossible to forget. "And what do you want from us?" she asked. "Nothing, or rather just one thing. Forgiveness." Walter let out a bitter laugh. "Forgiveness? You abandoned us on a road, Frank. You treated us like garbage. You tried to take the only thing we had, and now you want forgiveness? I know I don't deserve it. I know nothing I say will change what I did. But I have to try, because if I don't, I won't be able to move on. I won't be able to look at myself in the mirror." Dolores leaned forward. "Why did you do it, Frank? What did we do that was so wrong to deserve being abandoned like that?" Frank closed his eyes, tears beginning to stream down his face. "You didn't do anything wrong. The problem was me. It was Robert. It was Maria. We grew up thinking you owed us everything, that you were obligated to sacrifice for us. And when you got older, when you started needing help, we saw it as a burden, an inconvenience. We were selfish, cruel. We were monsters. And why are you here now? Because you've lost everything? Because you need help?" Frank shook his head. "No, I don't want money. I don't want anything from you. I just want to look you in the eyes and say, I'm sorry. I was the worst son anyone could have. And if I could go back in time and change everything, I would. But I can't. I can only try to be a better person from now on." Walter stood up and walked to the window. He stared out at the garden, his back to Frank. Dolores could see the tension in her husband's shoulders, the internal struggle he was waging. "When you saw the report about us," Dolores asked, "what did you feel?" "Shame. A shame so profound I wanted to disappear. I saw what you did with the money, how you helped so many people, how you became pillars of the community, and I realized that you are the people I should have been." "And Robert and Maria, do they know you're here?" "No. We don't talk anymore. After the lawsuit, we all went our separate ways. Robert is still working as a lawyer, but he lost clients because of his bad reputation. Maria got divorced and moved to New York City. We fell apart, and deep down, I think it's what we deserve." Walter turned around, his eyes red. "Do you know what the worst part was, Frank? It wasn't the abandonment itself. It was realizing that we raised 3 people incapable of love. We gave you everything, and still it wasn't enough. And that makes us question everything. Every decision, every sacrifice, was it all for nothing?" "It wasn't for nothing," Frank said, his voice breaking. "You tried. You loved. The failure wasn't yours. It was ours. We chose to be this way. We chose greed, selfishness. But that doesn't take away the value of what you did." Dolores felt the tears fall. It was so hard. She wanted to believe her son, to hug him and say everything was okay. But the wound was still open, still bleeding. "Frank, what do you really want from us?" Frank took a deep breath. "I want to try again. Not like it was before, because before was based on lies and obligation, but something new, something real. I want to really know Peter, to be a present father, and I want to know you too, for real. Not as the parents who owe me something, but as the people you are. And if we say no, Walter asked, if we say we've suffered enough and we don't want anything more to do with you? Frank nodded. I'll understand, and I'll respect it. But at least I tried. The silence returned. Dolores looked at Walter. Walter looked at Dolores. A silent conversation passed between them, a communication that only 50 years of marriage could create. Finally, Dolores spoke. We're not going to forgive you now, Frank. Maybe we'll never forgive you completely. What you did left scars that won't fade, but we will give you a chance to prove that you've changed, a chance to rebuild not what we had before, but something new. Frank began to sob. It wasn't a restrained cry, but a deep, liberating one. Thank you. I promise I'll try. Every day I'll try to be someone you can, in the future, maybe respect. Walter sat down again. There are conditions. First, you're going to get help for your gambling addiction. Second, you're going to get current on your child support for Peter. Third, you're going to show up here regularly, but without expecting hugs or declarations of love. You're going to have to earn that. Frank nodded fervently. Yes, all of it. I'll do all of it. In the weeks that followed, Frank kept his word. He found a support group for compulsive gamblers. He started working odd jobs, saving money to pay his back child support. He showed up at Dolores and Walter's house every Saturday, sometimes just to help with chores, other times just to talk. At first, it was awkward. There were moments of tension, of heavy silences, but slowly, something began to change. Frank was no longer the arrogant, distant man. He was someone humble, broken, trying to rebuild himself. And Dolores. And Walter, though cautious, began to see something in him they hadn't seen in years: sincerity. Camilla, upon learning that Frank was trying to change, allowed him to start seeing Peter. The visits were short, supervised, but they were a start. The boy, who was smart and sensitive, noticed the change in his father. There was still distance, still mistrust, but there was also curiosity. One Saturday, when Frank was at his parents' house helping to fix a fence in the garden, Peter arrived with Camilla. The boy stopped when he saw his father, surprised. "Daddy?" Frank dropped the hammer, wiping his dirty hands on his pants. "Hi, Peter." The boy ran toward him but stopped short of an embrace. He looked at his father with those big, innocent eyes. "Are you going to stay this time?" Frank knelt down to his son's level. "I am. I promise I'll try." "You promised before and you left." "I know. And I'm so sorry. But it's different now." "How do I know it's different?" Frank had no answer. How do you prove to a child that you've changed? How do you rebuild trust that has been broken so many times? You don't. Only time will tell, but I'll be here every Saturday, and if you want to give me a chance, I'll do everything I can not to disappoint you again. Peter thought for a moment. Then he held out his small hand. Okay, but if you disappear again, I'm not going to believe you anymore. Frank took his son's hand, squeezing it gently. Deal. Dolores watched the scene from the porch. Tears streamed silently down her face. Walter stood beside her, also moved. Do you think he'll make it? Walter whispered. I don't know, but at least he's trying, and that's more than we had before. The months passed. Frank continued with his therapy, continued working, continued showing up. Slowly, his relationship with Peter improved. The boy began to trust his father, began to smile when he saw him. There were still difficult moments, times when the mistrust returned, but the trend was positive. Robert and Maria never tried to make contact again. Mr. Morris, who kept in touch with some colleagues in Queens, informed them that Robert had moved to Washington, D.C., and that Maria was working as a teacher at a private school in New York City. They were living their lives but apparently alone, without family, without genuine connections. Dolores sometimes thought of them. She wondered if they were okay, if they were happy, if they would ever feel the weight of what they had done. But she didn't let those thoughts consume her. She had learned that you can't force people to change. You can only control your own reactions. The Wednesday gatherings continued to grow. The rented community hall became too small, and the city offered a larger space at the municipal community center. Dolores and Walter received an honor from the city council, recognizing their work with the city's seniors. The reporter who had done the first story returned for a follow-up showing the lasting impact the couple had created. Mrs. Teresa renovated the boarding house with the donated money and was able to house more people. John, the truck driver, used the money to fix his truck and started taking shorter routes, allowing for more time with his family. St. Anthony's nursing home hired more caregivers and significantly improved the quality of life for its residents. Dolores's book was translated into Spanish and began circulating in other Latin American countries. Messages arrived from all over, people sharing their own stories, thanking them for giving a voice to such a silent and painful problem. On a Sunday in November, a year after the abandonment, the family gathered at Dolores and Walter's house for lunch. Present were Camilla and Peter, Frank, Mrs. Teresa, John and his wife, Mr. Morris and his daughter, Mr. Miller from the boarding house, Jacqueline, and some of the seniors who attended the Wednesday gatherings. It was an unusual family, formed not by blood ties, but by choice, by genuine love, by compassion. Dolores looked around the bountiful table, listening to the conversations, the laughter, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. It wasn't a complete peace because the pain of the past would never fully disappear. But it was a peace that came from the certainty that, despite everything, she had found her place in the world. Walter held her hand under the table, squeezing it gently. She looked at him and saw the same feeling in her husband's eyes. After lunch, while everyone was talking in the living room, Dolores and Walter stepped out onto the porch. The afternoon sun was soft, the garden was in bloom, the air was fresh. Peter was playing in the yard, chasing a ball with Frank trying to keep up, a smile on his face. "Do you remember a year ago?" Walter asked. "I remember. We were abandoned on a road, with nothing, with no one. And look at us now," Dolores smiled. "Life is strange, isn't it? You lose everything and discover you can rebuild. Not the way it was, but in a new way, maybe even a better way." Walter nodded. "I still miss the kids, Robert and Maria, the way Frank was when he was little. Me, too, I always will. But I've learned that you can't live in what's missing. You have to live in what you have." "Do you think Frank has really changed?" Dolores thought for a moment. "I think he's trying. And maybe that's the most we can ask for. Change doesn't happen overnight. It's a long, painful process. But he's on the right path." Walter looked at his grandson playing. "And Peter, how do you think he'll grow up?" "Differently, I hope. I hope he learns from his father's mistakes, that he understands the value of family, not the family of blood, but the family we choose." "Would you do it all again?" Walter asked suddenly. "If you could go back in time, would you raise the kids the same way?" Dolores took a long time to answer. "I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. You always think you could have done better, but in the end I think we did what we could with what we had, and if our children chose to be the way they are, the responsibility is theirs, not ours." "Do you regret anything?" "Not valuing myself more. Giving so much that I forgot to savor. Little for myself. But I don't regret loving. Even if that love wasn't returned, I don't regret it." Walter smiled. "You've become wise, Dolores." She laughed. "We've become old. It's different." They stood there, side by side, watching life happen around them. Inside the house they could hear conversations, laughter, the clatter of dishes being washed. It was the sound of a family. Not the traditional family they once had, but a new one, built on more solid foundations: respect, gratitude, genuine love. That night, after everyone had gone home, Dolores and Walter sat in the living room. The house was quiet again, but it was a different silence from the one they had known months before. It wasn't the silence of loneliness, but the silence of contentment. "You know what I realized today," Walter said. "What?" "We won the lottery. Not when we sold the land, but when we were abandoned on that road." Dolores frowned. "What do you mean?" Because if that hadn't happened, we would have kept living in that illusion, thinking we had a family that cared, but who were really just there out of obligation. That abandonment, as painful as it was, set us free. It showed us who we really were and who we wanted to be. Dolores reflected on his words. You're right. It was the worst and the best day of our lives. The worst because we lost the illusion. The best because we gained the truth. They hugged, a long, tight embrace, full of everything they had lived through together. 50 years of marriage, of ups and downs, of joys and sorrows, but always together. I love you, Dolores. I love you too, Walter. In the days that followed, life returned to its routine. Dolores continued organizing the Wednesday gatherings, now, with the help of a group of volunteers that had formed. Walter continued giving talks, expanding his reach to other cities. Frank continued visiting the house, keeping his promise to be present. Peter continued to grow, a happy child, surrounded by love and examples of how to live with dignity. And then, on a December afternoon, almost a year and a half after the abandonment, something unexpected happened. Dolores received a letter. There was no return address, but the postmark was from New York City. She opened it carefully and immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from Maria. The letter was short, direct. Mom and Dad, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to welcome me back. I just wanted you to know that I think about you every day, that I regret everything, that I'm in therapy trying to understand why I did what I did. I don't know if I'll ever be able to look in the mirror without feeling shame, but I know that you are much better people than I will ever be. I hope you are happy. You deserve it. With love and regret, Maria. Dolores read the letter aloud to Walter. When she finished, they both sat in silence. What do you think? Walter asked. I think she's trying in her own way. Maybe one day we'll be able to talk. Maybe not. But at least she acknowledged it. Are you going to write back? Dolores thought for a long moment. I will, but not now, when I'm ready, when the wound hurts less. Walter agreed. It was the sensible thing to do. A few more weeks passed. Christmas arrived. For the first time in decades, Dolores and Walter celebrated with a family that truly cared. The house was full, decorated simply, but with love. Peter got presents, played, and laughed. Frank helped prepare the Christmas dinner, for the first time actively participating, not just as a guest, but as a part of it all. At midnight, as everyone raised their glasses, Dolores looked around and felt her eyes well up. Not with sadness, but with gratitude. She had lost so much, but she had also gained so much. Walter raised his glass. I want to make a toast to family, not the one we're born into, but the one we choose. To the people who stay when everything falls apart. To true love which doesn't demand or expect but simply gives. Everyone raised their glasses. To family. The toast echoed through the house. Peter, who didn't fully understand the meaning, repeated it with enthusiasm. Dolores looked at her grandson and saw hope in him. The hope that the cycle had been broken, that this child would grow up differently, understanding the true value of people. After the celebration, when everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Dolores and Walter sat on the porch. The sky was full of stars, a rare sight for a big city. Walter pointed to a particularly bright one. Make a wish, Dolores smiled. I already have everything I need. Even so, make a wish. Dolores closed her eyes, thought for a moment. I wish that we continue like this, together, healthy, with purpose, that Peter grows up happy, that Frank stays on the right path, that we can help more people, and that in the end, when our time comes, we can look back without regrets. Walter held her hand. Amen. They remained there, under the starry sky, two survivors who had walked through hell and come out the other side, not unscathed. Never. Unscathed, but stronger, wiser, more human. Because in the end, what Dolores and Walter had learned, through all that suffering, was something simple but profound. Family isn't who you're born with. Family is who stays when the world falls apart. It's who cares without expecting anything in return. It's who extends a hand when everything crumbles. The wealth that transforms isn't in bank figures, but in the freedom to love those who deserve to stay. And they, finally, after so much searching, had found that family. It had been a long, painful journey full of loss, but it had also been a journey of discovery, of rebirth, of redemption. Dolores looked at Walter. Walter looked at Dolores, and without needing to say a word, they both understood that, despite everything, they had won. Not because they had money, not because they had recognition, but because they had something far more valuable. They had true love, they had purpose, they had dignity, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Dolores and Walter has touched your heart. If you were moved, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul. We'll see you in the next episode.